Thank you very much. Now we've all had time to read the additional information. We will go to, I nearly said Phil Collins then, no, Phil Jordan. Sorry. Phil Jordan for agenda item 3. Thank you. If you could do your.
Good afternoon, members. As introduced already, the first application is reference S172155. I won't read through that full description of development there on the screen. Effectively, it's an outline application for the erection of a designer outlet centre at the existing downtown site in Grantham, just north of Grantham. I've already been introduced. Phil Jordan, not Phil Collins, Principal Planning Officer. Anyone who doesn't know, what I'll say before I start, my wife's 37 weeks pregnant, so if I suddenly run off towards the door, that's probably the explanation, but hopefully that's not going to happen, and or won't happen within the next hour or so anyway. Okay, so the application site, I think most members are familiar with. This is the third time the scheme's come to planning committee. You can see the site on the screen there in the large aerial shot. Like you can see the sort of the big area of Grantham, and then following the A1 north of Grantham, you can see that existing site where the downtown store is. Just looking at the site in a bit more context, you can see on the screen there you've got the existing downtown store building, the garden centre on the site. You have got some adjacent employment uses to the south, and then to the north of the site you've got the moto services, which are just off the A1. And that existing distribution building that's part of the existing downtown site. This really just replicates that previous slide. In the top right of the screen there, you can see the red outline of the site in relation to Grantham, and then you can see the existing layout of the downtown store within that red line. So just some background, as I've already introduced, this application has been to planning committee twice before, both times with a resolution to approve, once in February 2019 and once in September 2021. Since that most recent resolution to approve, the Section 106 agreement has now progressed to a point which is agreed by all parties. And ready to complete. What happened since the last September committee, during the final stages of that drafting, there were some minor discrepancies in terms of land ownership with the submitted plans, and these have since been rectified. One very small piece of land, less than 5 square metres, and a piece of unregistered land that have resulted in updated plans and an updated application certificate. Following that information, we did carry out a further round of consultation in February this year, and feedback from that consultation and further objections have been reported in the updated committee report and the additional items paper. Important point, this is a new decision. Members aren't bound by the previous resolutions that they've made in relation to this application. So just going through the proposal itself, the existing downtown boundary mill as part of the site would be retained with some elevational improvements. The garden centre that's on the site would be demolished and replaced with a new building. The designer outlet centre component of the application is for just over 20,000 square metres and would provide space for 107 units. There's a large goods retail element to the store. Part of the garden centre that's out at the moment would be replaced with a smaller building. And then there are other additional elements, including a tourist information and visitor centre, a training academy, or that would be a contribution, it's and/or a contribution to the local college, an associated leisure unit, some ancillary office space, and also includes improvements to the existing access to the site off Occupation Lane. And then at the bottom there's the associated amount of car parking spaces that would come with the development. So this master plan, indicative being an outline application, just shows those various components of the site. So you can see the existing downtown store, the location or the proposed location for the training academy, replacement garden centre and office space, and large goods retail store. Also an indicative location for the training academy, leisure unit, and a multi-storey car park. Submitted with the outline application have been various parameter plans, and they'd be used to secure or to sort of fix parameters around landscaping, the heights of various buildings, and sort of key access routes within the site itself. So the key issues with the application itself, there's the retail impacts of the development on the vitality and viability of planned investment and affected centres, the cumulative impact of the development alongside the already consented and implemented Rioja Designer Outlet Village, socio-economic considerations, that's effectively the sort of the economic and job growth that would come with the application, landscape and visual impact, transport and access considerations, environmental considerations. The application's been considered under environmental impact assessment regulations, and so has been accompanied by an environmental statement. And then the proposed mitigation measures and controls, which are secured by either planning condition or the Section 106 agreement. So next few slides I'll just go through fairly quickly because it sort of gives an overview of the assessment of the scheme. Clearly there's a lot of detail in the main report and additional items paper that members have had an opportunity to read through. But in terms of principle, the site's a brownfield site. It's an established retail destination. The site was previously designated as employment land, although no longer is in the current local plan, and it's been recognised as having that established retail use. The proposal would contribute to the wider Grantham economy, and it's considered to be broadly in accordance with the sustainable development policy, the spatial policies in the plan, and the employment policy, which allows expansion of existing businesses. The site is out of centre and has been assessed on that basis. And as the floor space is greater than 1,000 square metres, it's been accompanied by a retail impact assessment. Two key parts of retail policy: what is the sequential test, and what is the retail impact assessment test, which the proposal is considered to be in compliance with both the local policies and national policies on both of those areas. So looking at sequential test in a bit more detail, effectively what this does is retail policy seeks to focus development on town centres, and where you have out of centre development, you're required to go through a process of assessing whether the application proposal could be accommodated on sites that are closer to the town centre. The policies, give preference to those sites which are sequentially preferable. The sites recognised as having good existing transport and links, and including public transport, And an important part of the policy test is that in going through that sequential assessment, applicants are required to demonstrate flexibility on issues such as format and scale. Disaggregation, which you'll see talked about in the main committee report and additional items paper, that is effectively looking at whether it's appropriate to break down the component parts of the application into smaller parts and assess whether they can fit within any sites that are sequentially preferable. That's been looked at in some detail for this proposal, and it's not considered appropriate or necessary in this instance. It's considered that the applicant has demonstrated sufficient flexibility on issues of format and scale, and officers are satisfied that there's no more sequentially preferable sites that are either available or suitable. That includes the...
Excuse me, Madam Chairman, I'm sorry to interrupt. It seems like there's two meetings going on in this. Appreciate it. If you've got a separate meeting, appreciate it. I'm struggling to concentrate on this. So, Madam Chairman, sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. If you need to talk a lot, then perhaps you should leave and come back. Thank you.
Thank you. So that assessment of alternative sites does include or has included the Rioja site, which is on the King 31 land. Council's had independent advice on this matter from retail consultant Stantec, and it's considered that the sequential test has been passed. In terms of retail impact, the top of the screen there, that's the relevant local plan policy and national policy on retail impact. As I've already said, retail applications greater than 1,000 square metres are required to go through an assessment of impact. That includes both impact on committed and planned investment in those centres and impact on the vitality and viability of any affected centres. So important point, it's not just the closest centre, which is Grantham, it's all those centres within the catchment area of the development that have been assessed. The retail impact assessment was last updated and submitted in August 2020, and that's the basis on which the application has been assessed. There has been objection to the robustness of that assessment and the predicted impacts, and again, the council's officers have taken advice on that matter. Part of the retail impact assessment is to look at the health of the centres, and there's guidance on how to do that with various qualitative and quantitative measures that are in the planning practice guidance notes. Effectively, in summary, following that independent advice from Stantec, officers agree with the conclusions reached by the applicant, and that there would be no significant adverse impact on either investment in the affected centres or on the vitality or viability of any affected centres, and that's subject to the restrictive conditions that are recommended and the planning obligations in the Section 106 agreement. Won't spend too long on the next few slides because there's not a huge amount sort of update since the last resolution. In terms of socioeconomics, the application scheme would create up to 240 net local temporary construction jobs over the 2.5-year period, and be just over 1,200 full-time equivalent or 1,600 full and part-time local jobs. There's also an opportunity to claw back some of the expenditure that's currently leaked out of the district. So that's where you would have local shoppers having to travel out of the district to access this type of facility, as happens at the moment. There's the ability to increase tourism and visitor footfall in the area by the application, and an opportunity to generally enhance the image of Grantham as a retail, leisure and visitor destination. I'll come on to the more detailed look at the planning obligations, but these also include town obligations that are contributions towards town centre improvements for Grantham, improved educational links via the training academy, and the benefits of the scheme when looked at comparably with the consented RIOCA scheme are considered to be broadly comparable. And the report has looked at various scenarios where by either both schemes would come forward or effectively one or the other scheme would be realised in terms of sort of the cumulative and net benefits for each of those scenarios. In terms of landscape and visual impact, I say it's an outline scheme, but there are parameter plans that define the building heights and sort of broad parameters of the layout itself. The final details will obviously be secured through a reserved maths application, but the environmental impact assessment has been based on those parameter plans. There's not considered to be any significant adverse impact on the surrounding landscape. And there are actually opportunities to make enhancements to the site and its surroundings through a high quality landscaping scheme. So in this regard, the application is considered to be in accordance with the local plan policies and relevant national plan policies. In terms of transport and access, also a chapter on this in the environmental impact assessment. The councils again, or officers have taken independent advice from Barton Wilmore, who are satisfied with the robustness of the environmental statement. There's not been any objection from the county councillors, local highways authority or national highways as they are now, subject to the recommended conditions that are set out in the main report. There are some improvements that would occur as a result of the development, the improved access off Occupation Lane, improvements to the Belton Lane B and B1174 junction, improvements to that A1, A52 east-west junction. And there is an associated travel plan which sort of seeks to aim reliance on vehicular traffic and encourages sort of a wider use of more sustainable transport modes. The car parking is considered to be sufficient for the development that's proposed. And again, the legal agreement requires enhancements to the existing bus service. So just some further general environmental considerations. As I've already said, that environmental impact assessment was updated, has been independently assessed. The design of the buildings and the sustainable building policy would be complied with through the condition 25 that's listed there. There's requirements for biodiversity enhancement through the conditions listed on the screen. And I'll just go further down, flood risk and drainage, ground conditions, the air quality and dust and odour assessment is covered by the construction and environmental management plan. I won't carry on sort of reading through every single one of those, but effectively there it goes through the sort of the further material considerations and how those are controlled by condition. I think the bottom line, the important point is that the conclusion in the environmental statement is that there's been or there would be no significant adverse impacts as a result of the development. So just looking at some of the mitigation and controls in the schedule of conditions and the Section 106 agreement, there is a requirement for a tourist information and visitor centre within the site. A pop-up shop, that's an aspect of the scheme that's provides some space to sort of effectively showcase either existing town centre retailers or other elements that will want to be promoted at the site itself. I've already talked about the improved bus service, the travel plan. There's requirements for directional signage to the site, car park signage within the town centre, and contributions towards various tourism initiatives and a tourism manager. Talked a bit about the training scheme contribution. That's either contribution to the local college or that training academy provision on site. And there are some financial contributions as well to town centre improvements. Just on the occupancy restrictions, quite an important point that's covered in the main report on the additional items paper. The purpose of the occupation restrictions is to ensure that the development would function in the way in which it's been assessed. And you'll note in the late items paper, there is a move away from that language of tiering, which was previously used. The important point to note here is that the application has been assessed on the basis of where trade would come from. And the way in which it's been assessed is that 37.5% would come from a 30-minute drive time. 55% of the trade would come from what's called the secondary catchment area, which is up to an hour. And then there's an allowance that 7.5% of the trade would come from beyond that hour's drive time. And really what's important here is that it's the collective offer of the scheme, the collective offer, that retail offer and everything else that goes with it, that would ensure that it's attractive enough to visitors as a destination to draw trade in from some of those wider areas. And you'll see annexed to the additional items paper, the list of permitted retailers which are allowed to occupy those units within the site. Within the legal agreement, there are other measures and controls around occupation. So in addition to those list of permitted retailers, there is the ability for further retailers to be added. One way is that they meet a predefined criteria, which is referred to as the Javelin criteria, and that sort of insists on the retailers being a certain quality against a predefined benchmark. And then there's a third ability for retailers to sort of join, and that has to be done in agreement with the council, but needs to be sort of done on the basis of the applicant providing an updated retail impact assessment that effectively provides evidence that those further retailers wouldn't result in any significant adverse impact on the town centres. There are other restrictions that are added, not just to the new elements of the scheme, but also to that existing downtown store, which is a betterment on the existing situation. As things stand, the existing downtown store just has a single restriction which prevents non-food retailers. But there are sort of further restrictive conditions that have been added through the legal agreement, and those include what's referred to as a no poaching clause, which prevents existing town centre retailers in Grantham, Newark and Bolton from locating themselves in the new proposed site. And if they did, they have to commit to maintaining a town centre presence for the next 5 years. And then I think lastly, and quite importantly, that there are also monitoring requirements. This is quite an unusual development, and there's quite a lot of controls in that legal agreement that would require monitoring. And there is provision in there that effectively the applicant is required to assist with the resourcing of that monitoring. So just as a conclusion, the conclusion is the same as we reached previously in September. The proposal is considered to be in accordance with the local plan when taken as a whole. It's also in compliance with the National Planning Policy Framework, and officers don't consider that there are any material considerations of sufficient weight that indicate otherwise. So therefore, the application remains to be recommended for approval, subject to the conditions in the main report and completion of that Section 106 agreement that would secure those obligations set out in Section 8.38 of the main report. Thank you. That's the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Phil, for that presentation. Could we have our first speaker, please, which is Jeremy Fieldsend, a representative from Buckminster. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, certainly. Jeremy Fieldsend. Yes, S-E-N-D. Okay. And when we get to questions, if you require to both answer, then that's fine. I will allow it. Okay, thank you. Start when you're ready. You have 3 minutes.
My name is Jeremy Fieldsend and I represent Buckminster, which, as you may know, has considerable interest in Grantham town centre. The scheme is presented as one containing high-end brands on a par with MacArthur Glen's Cheshire and Ashford centres and Gunwharf Quays, and importantly, one that does not compete aggressively with Grantham town centre. Unfortunately, the controls in place in the Section 106 agreement simply will not secure this. The retail impact analysis is based on a high-end outlet being created. No analysis of an outlet that operates below this level has been carried out, and officers have said that a scheme like this would not be acceptable. And QC's advice assures us that the retail impact analysis is materially deficient. International data analysis, CACI, provides an industry classification of outlet retail centres, and they have analysed the permitted retailer list of 605 brands in this application's draft 106 agreement. This is the list from which occupiers must be drawn. It's the only means of controlling the quality of occupier at downtown, and such the only means of protecting the town centre. And I'd like to highlight just two of CACI's findings. Firstly, Cheshire Oaks, Ashford and Gunwharf Quays all have at least 20% of their retailers categorised as premium and luxury. However, the Section 106 agreement here does not require the presence of any premium and luxury brands at downtown, none whatsoever. Secondly, there are no less than 182 brands on the permitted retailer list that CACI classify as lower quality. They are neither premium nor are they luxury, and more than enough to fill the 107 stores in the application without any high-end stores. The 106 cannot prevent a scheme being made up of lower quality retailers, and therefore it will not be a premium designer outlet centre. And this means that the Section 106 agreement is powerless to protect the town centre. But there is a solution. Create a short list of premium and luxury brands from the 164 brands that CACI identify in this category, and have an obligation that at least 20% of the retailers are selected from that list. Councillors, if you approve this application today, you will not be securing the standard of designer outlet that has been promised. And what is perhaps much, much worse, you will be authorising an out-of-town retail park that could decimate the town centre. I urge you to refuse this application today and ask your officers to revise the Section 106 agreement to ensure that a premium design outlet is indeed created and not just another out-of-town retail park that will damage still further Grantham town centre.
Thank you very much. Do I have any questions for the speaker? No? Thank you very much. Could I have our next speaker, please? Richard Broadhead for the applicant. Thank you.
Chairman, committee, good afternoon. We really must stop meeting like this. Joking aside, we never anticipated being here again, discussing our plans to regenerate our downtown Grantham site. The delays we've endured over the last 4.5 years have been frustrating, to say the least. And those delays have prevented valuable investment into Grantham, into the local economy, and the creation of more than 1,600 jobs, all of which we'd like to do. A huge amount of work has gone into developing our proposal and making sure that it ticks all the right boxes for Grantham, for the wider region, for our downtown business, and for the future. And that hard work has paid off. We're very pleased that our development has been recommended for approval for what is now the 3rd time. Despite the hurdles we've faced, one thing that has stayed consistent throughout this very long process is our passion for this development and our commitment to delivering it as soon as possible. Our downtown site is crying out for regeneration. You saw that for yourselves during last year's site visit. We're more determined than ever to deliver this project for Grantham, to create a retail destination of which Grantham can be proud, to create jobs and to build a successful future. I would like to once again express my sincere gratitude to the SKDC planning officers who have worked tirelessly on this case over the years, and to commend them for standing firm despite ongoing threats of legal action against the council from Buckminster Estates and Rioja Developments. This application has undergone meticulous legal scrutiny. Clearly, it is legally sound, and that's why it's being recommended for approval again. Undeniably, Grantham is important to us, and we are important to Grantham. We really do care about Grantham and the neighbouring towns, and that's reflected in the extensive planning conditions that we've embraced and the comprehensive Section 106 agreement. So it's now time to move on. We really need to get on with the job and deliver this regeneration project. Our colleagues and our supporters who live in Grantham and the surrounding towns have waited long enough. It's time for us to start building the future and delivering the benefits. So to reassure you, we stand ready, we're determined to move forward and are excited about the future. So it's over to you now, and I truly hope that we can count on your continued support in approving this application for the 3rd time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do I have any questions? Councillor Paulwood first.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, 1,600 jobs you mentioned. That's a significant number of jobs. Is that the total full-time and part-time jobs that will be there? Is that additional to what's there already?
They're additional jobs. They're additional jobs. They're new jobs.
Oh, thank you.
Councillor Morgan.
Thank you. I understand that the Boundary Mill site will remain with the parallel, in effect, to the new development. Can you just, because I can see when I look at the list of retailers, some of the names there are actually sold by Boundary Mill. So has the impact of the development, the expansion of your products for sale, especially around clothing, for example, taken into account the impact on Boundary Mill? How have you worked that out?
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. Yes, you're quite right. Boundary Mill will continue to operate where it is. We share the existing downtown store with Boundary Mill. They have around 55,000 feet. And we have a good relationship with them. It's a long-term relationship. And they do have some brands that we don't have. And they do have some brands, they currently trade some brands that are on the list that we could introduce into the designer outlet on the 106 agreement. Clearly, we wouldn't be seeking to compete with them, and we'll work together with them to make sure that we get the right solution. And that's kind of how we've planned it. They're fully aware and supportive of what we're planning to do.
Thank you. Councillor Selby.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Yes, good afternoon to you. Just a concern, I believe this came up at the last time the application came forward, was with regarding traffic coming from Nottingham along the A52. I believe traffic will be encouraged to go straight to the A1 and not go through the village of Allington. Could you just clarify that and just give us an assurance on that, please? Thank you.
Absolutely. As part of this application, we're intending to make improvements to the A52 A1 junction. We'll also make improvements to signage and things like that. And you're quite right. There are people when they travel from Nottingham who cut through Allington. We actually went to meet Allington Parish Council and as part of the consultation process and reassured them that we would work with them to make improvements so that people don't cut through. And actually a lot of that can be achieved through signage.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan, did you want to come back?
Thank you, Councillor Selby, for that, actually, but I was going to raise that later on. But can you just expand about the improvements to the A1, A52 junction? Because I actually can see what the concerns are of the Allington residents when you, because it's actually pretty horrible coming off and doing a right turn in order to pick up the A1 North through the junction until we get to downtown. So can you just explain what you're planning to do there?
Well, I haven't brought our specialist transport advisor to talk about the detail of the roundabout, but of the junctions, but certainly whether you are exiting or accessing the A1 at the A52 junction, it's not easy as it currently stands. So there are plans to significantly improve and upgrade those junctions, which will have better filter lanes and things like that in place. In terms of the issue about people cutting through Allington, you know, the last thing we would want is that to happen. And as I say, we met Allington, we met the residents and the council in Allington, and as well as those changes to improve the A1, A52, we're committed to putting improved signage in place that will actually signpost that the best way to Nottingham is down the A1, join the A52. And we're committed to doing that. And I made that very point to the residents in Allington, because the roundabout near downtown, if you go onto that roundabout, at the moment, there's no sign that says Nottingham at that point. It says A1 South. So actually to improve that and put the word Nottingham in there will help direct people down the A1 rather than them cutting across and going through Allington. So there is significant investment proposed for that junction and at Belton Lane and Occupation Lane, all of which we're committed to do.
Thank you very much. Do I have anybody else wishing to ask any questions? Lovely, thank you very much. Questions now for the officer. Do I have any? Councillor Morgan, thank you.
I've got a few actually. It's such a big. First of all, can you clarify? It's an outline planning application, and we've got reserved matters. But I noticed that some of the conditions appear to almost relate to what I would have expected at the next stage when you're actually looking in more detail at buildings, etc. I'm just a bit concerned that we've not kind of melded or muddied the water there. I'm just trying to be really clear what we're discussing today and what would be reserved matters and what will come back to committee. For example, design, etc. If I could just put that to you first of all.
Yep. So the planning permission is ultimately made up of 4 components, really. There's the outline planning consent, which we're talking about today, and then the associated conditions that sit underneath that. Many of those conditions would need to be complied with prior to development commencing. The legal agreement sits alongside the outline consent, and that secures those various sort of obligations on the developer, some of which are financial, some of which are obligations on them doing certain things within a certain time, the occupancy controls, which I spoke about. The reserved matters application follows the outline consent, and that is purely to approve those matters that have been reserved, which in this case is layout, scale, landscaping and appearance. So it's effectively just the design and layout of the buildings themselves. What we do though sometimes with an outline application is we, in order to provide a thorough assessment, we still try to secure various parameters so that we know effectively the buildings won't be higher than a certain height and the layout will be broadly looking as it is, in order to make those sort of more detailed assessments. But really, ultimately, those 4 areas will all need to be dealt with and complied with for the applicant to go ahead and actually start building. So at the moment, we're looking at the outline consent itself, but we're looking at the conditions underneath that and the Section 106 agreement alongside it. And then it will be the reserved matters that would then follow, and we would look at those details of the buildings and the layout of the site itself.
Thank you. Emma, did you want to come in there? Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick point in relation to outlines and reserved matters. You can actually get into trouble by not imposing conditions on the outline and then regretting it and wanting to try and impose them on the reserved matters. It's actually the proper thing to do is to impose a lot of conditions on the outline that you might think, well, we don't yet know that detail, so should we putting a condition about levels or anything like that? And the answer is yes, we should. What you also sometimes find is that the applicants will come in and agree and submit the details pursuant to those conditions with the reserved matters. So you get the response at the reserved matters. It's not to take away your control as a planning committee or our control as a planning authority to look at these details later. It's just so we've got belts and braces, a proper planning permission in place in terms of the outline and the subsequent reserved matters.
Okay, yes.
So for picking that up then, are we saying that when we progress, actually the word design was missing from the reserved matters, which you mentioned there verbally, but it's not written, and that threw me because actually I just was thinking, for example, about the car park, pedestrian access, etc. And I thought, well, actually, when will we discuss that? That was just an example. But I feel design should be in there, the word, because obviously that's broader than appearance, for example. I couldn't see that in there as a reserved matter, and I think it's really important that that is very clear. And just clarifying then that we can therefore subsequently potentially alter or add conditions further down the line as we start to get the detail. Is that correct?
So I'll take both of those points. So the reserved matters are set out in legislation. Design really covers a number of issues. It kind of cross-cuts appearance because, you know, that's kind of architectural design. It certainly covers layout in the sense that the layout is all about how the site is laid out and how the car parking spaces would be laid out, how the spaces between the buildings would be laid out. The landscaping, that covers both hard and soft landscaping, so any tree planting, any hard surfacing materials. But the actual labelling of the reserved matters is already sort of laid out by legislation. And then there's a number of more detailed components which sit underneath those. In terms of adding further conditions, that can be done at the reserved matter stage, but they should only relate to the reserved matters themselves. So that's why typically a outline planning consent is really sort of front loading all the information onto that part of the permission, so that you're sure that you get that information at the appropriate time for further down the line. But if there are specific conditions that relate to any of those reserved matters, then they can be sort of picked up and applied separately at that stage. But I mean, hopefully, if you look through the list of conditions, it's fairly comprehensive in terms of the matters that have been covered at this stage.
Gone through the conditions, and I've spotted there's a few or queries or issues around them. If I can first of all touch on actually it was a consultation done regarding archaeology. I've spoken to the chair of Grantham Civic Society, and they do not agree that there is no need for an archaeological assessment of this site. It's mainly because if you actually consider the site, it's the Great North Road, which is actually, it's a historic route of significant national importance. And there was significant development found, Roman, there were 4,000 artifacts were found on the Relief Road site when they actually started to do development there. And therefore, it does indicate that there could still be further, for example, Roman finds on the site that we're looking at now. So at least some form of cursory archaeological assessment should be done. And we've completely omitted it from this report because we appear to have approached an organisation I've not really heard of before. Was it the Lincolnshire Conservation Trust, something like that, who aren't local? It's really unfortunate, I think, that we didn't contact or specifically approach Grantham Civic Society as a consultee, which we normally do, actually, when it comes to developments around the Grantham area. So if I could, I'll put that to you, because I appreciate that could be quite a big piece of work. But it is important that we do at least have some sort of oversight of the development, because things may turn up, and then what's going to happen to those artifacts, for example. Then I'd like to go to condition 9, which is on page 85. And I'd just like to add, hopefully this isn't contentious at all, but it's around lighting, if I recall correctly. And we don't mention the potential impact of lighting on wildlife. So I just think we should make that point, because that we have appropriate lighting, taking that into account, because it is a rural area. Then we've got condition 22 on page 89. We talk about the purpose is to protect our wildlife, but we actually only investigate a potential for crested news. Well, there's other protected species. I think we should be adding and other protected species to that condition, if we may. And then on, I think it's condition 23, I think we should be adding biodiversity protection, mitigation and enhancement, because we're talking about the future of the biodiversity on that site, but there may already be existing biodiversity we should be protecting. So condition 23. And then the fire brigade, Links Fire and Rescue, commented there should be hydrants provided on the site. And I can't see a condition relating to that. And I believe there should be, and that's a safety matter. I'm happy to have your comments on those.
Yeah, so if I go through those sort of point by point, Heritage Trust of Lincolnshire the council has a service level agreement with them to provide archaeological advice. So they comment on all of our proposals, and they're based in Heckington, but they sort of cover the Lincolnshire area. The issue with adding additional conditions that aren't supported by what our designated consultees have said is that legally conditions have to be meet various tests, and one of those is that they have to be necessary, and it's difficult, I think, to, if we've got the appointed consultee saying that they don't consider any further archaeological work is necessary, it's difficult to justify a condition in that respect. I think that's largely accounted for the brownfield nature of the site and the fact that a large amount of ground disturbance would have already happened there. Moving on to the conditions themselves that you highlighted, appreciate what you said about lighting and the impacts on ecology and biodiversity, but I think that really is covered by the wording of condition 23, which requires a biodiversity mitigation and enhancement plan. And so that's the sort of wording we've seen used by inspectors in their decisions. What effectively that does is it acknowledges that the developers already carried out an amount of baseline ecological work, so they've got an understanding of what the likely ecological impacts are on the site, but they're then required to put forward a full scheme to us that covers all those various protected species and also seeks to secure the enhancement, which I think sort of covers the third point you're asking. And then finally, in relation to fire and rescue, an additional condition was added. It's condition 51, which requires details of the fire fighting measures, including the provision of fire hydrants, to be submitted by the local planning authority. So that was the condition that was agreed through the further consultation there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Phil Dilks.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think Mr. Jordan has actually largely covered the point, but it was in relation to my friend Councillor Morgan's comments on archaeological digs. And it says quite specifically on page 19 that among, the Natural England, Historic England and Heritage Trust of Lincolnshire have been consulted and advised that there is a low potential for archaeological remains to be encountered, and specifically they say archaeological investigation work is not required. Now I appreciate what Councillor Morgan says about the local civic society, but this application has been around for 5 years and everybody and their dog in Grantham knows about it. And if they don't, they ought to. And so they've had ample opportunity, should they wish and should they have that view, to have made that view known to us before now. Are we in debate, Madam Chairman? Or
We do questions and debate together, so I'm quite happy for you to make a statement, comment, whatever.
Maybe premature, Madam Chairman, but I'm of the view, having read all the papers, and I thank you for the half an hour that we had to read and update us with the additional information. I've got to say, I've considered all that. I've heard the objections and those for it, and I've seen the suggestion, if I could call it that there might be a judicial review should we pass this, but it would seem to me that, given all the professional advice that we've had, that we would be in a reasonably safe position or a good position to defend such action. And frankly, if we refused it, I think we would be in a similarly perhaps legal position. However, having said all that, it's been around for 5 years, this application. It was 2017 that it was made. It's, this committee has passed it previously, or something similar to it in principle previously. I'm of the mind that we should today pass it, and I'm happy to suggest that as a motion, that this application is approved. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm quite happy to second that. I think there are many positives to go with this site application. It's a brownfield site to start with. So hopefully the archaeological will have been done 30 odd years ago when the site was put there. They want to work with the college, another positive. I mean, like you say, I agree with everything else you say. Councillor Robbins, did you want to come in?
I was just going to second that motion.
Councillor Morgan?
Thank you. For point of information, the Civic Society did make a submission, but because, as we've pointed out, this has been going on for so long and there have been so many revisits of it, they thought that their original statement stood, but clearly it's been lost over time, and they were expecting to be consulted, as they have been in the past, and specifically, but were not. The reason I raised this is because I was on this committee when we looked at the relief road, and we were given all these assurances there would be no real need, there would be no real fines at that site. Some trenching work had been done by the applicant, and then we get these most remarkable finds. I'm talking everything from Roman burials to building foundations to Bronze Age, Iron Age, across the entire works. So this is our heritage. Yes, actually, I agree that it is a brownfield site, and there has been works there. But an awful lot of that land, if you actually look at it, has really largely been covered by car park or very superficial covering. It has not had any in-depth. In fact, we'll expect that to be happening. So I don't think it's unreasonable if we start digging foundations for new buildings that we put some form of request in to have, because what will happen if they do find something? If we put nothing in there and they do find something, it's not their fault then. If they bulldoze through it, it will be ours, because we failed to give them a framework to operate in. I am making that point. As a Grantham councillor, I supported this application last time, and I would again, because overall I think that it's a wonderful thing that we have this great job creation. Just a kind of point to make on the training front, it would be great if some of those training roles with college were in the construction side as well as actually in the subsequent retail, something to consider. We have in the past been talking about Grantham College and its construction training. So if there's any way that they could somehow incorporate that would be a really good thing as well. I think that there are concerns. It's wrong to say there aren't. There are concerns among local retailers about the impacts. I've looked at the list and I can see also products or suppliers who support some of our local retailers. But somebody said to me today, actually, that they see downtown as being really our department store. And I think that's very true for local people, that it does provide a service that we just couldn't physically get in town because we just don't have the space to provide some of the things that they sell. So as long as we give people a choice really where they want to shop, and let's just make sure that we also focus on Grantham Town Centre, make that an attractive place as well. That's our challenge as a council.
Thank you. I've had Councillor Selby, did you wish to? And Councillor Stevens, yeah, Councillor Selby first.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Totally agree with what Councillor Dilks has said, so thank you to Councillor Dilks for your comments. I would have seconded this, Madam Chairman. I welcome this application. There's a lot of pluses for this. It really is. The jobs, it goes without saying, that would be wonderful for the area. Tourism, it'll attract people in just downtown. They'll go probably Beaver Castle, Belton House. There's benefits there for tourism. Regarding the comment we heard with regarding decimating the town centre. Well, Madam Chairman, on our local plan, we've got over 7,000 houses that we're building in the Grantham area alone. You're looking there, probably 15 to 20,000 new shoppers. They've got to shop somewhere. They're going to want to shop in the town centre. They're going to want to shop at downtown. They'll also shop at the Buckminster development as well. I think there will be more than enough shoppers to go round. So that's for me is not a concern whatsoever. So yes, I absolutely welcome this. And I think there's been a lot of work that's gone into this, a lot of investment that I'm sure they wouldn't have put the time and effort into this if they didn't believe it would work. And I would say to the Buckminster Estates, you know, there's enough shoppers to go around, and I think I don't think they've got anything to fear. Personally, I would welcome a third retail development if somebody wanted to come forward. I wouldn't worry from that perspective. I really wouldn't. I think it's an excellent application. I really like it, and I'm happy to support it, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Selby. Councillor Judy Stevens.
I'm just looking through the paperwork again, and I think I was on the committee last time we discussed this, but is it not concerning to the planning officer the response from neighbouring councils in terms of the impact that they feel it's going to have on their shopping areas? You know, for example, Newark, Nottingham, Peterborough, Lincoln. If they're all concerned about that, how can we be so confident that actually Grantham will continue to thrive with this? I'm not, you know, just putting it out there. I was quite interested to know. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo. As I said in the presentation, the retail impact of the proposal has been assessed in its own right and alongside also on a sort of a cumulative basis alongside the consented Rioja development and also alongside other committed developments, including one on the edge of Newark. Again, what the policy requires is an assessment not just of the closest town centre, which is Grantham in this case, but other potentially affected town centres within the catchment area of the development. There would be impacts on other centres, and those have been assessed. The council officers have taken independent advice in that respect from our own retail consultants, and the advice we've had is that none of those impacts would be significantly adverse, which would be the policy test for refusing planning permission. So on that basis, that's why the recommendation is for approval.
Is that even true now with after the pandemic and so on, and the growth in online shopping and the well-documented problems that the high street are having now? Is that still relevant now this year?
Yeah, so clearly there's a lot of judgments involved in assessing retail impact, and much of that detail is in the report itself. There's national planning guidance which underpins sort of the way retail impact assessments are done, and there's a huge number of variables that go into those retail impact assessments, both in terms of qualitative data and quantitative data. I think it says in the report itself, it isn't an exact science. There have been difficulties, making those assessments. Again, that's referred to in the report, both around the time of the pandemic and the lockdowns, and also in this recovery period. But our view as officers, and as I say, the advice we've had is that the information we've got is sufficient to make those judgments and ensure that any decision would be sufficiently robust in that respect.
Thank you. Do I have any other speakers? Councillor Morgan. Can I just make the comment about the Civic Society and planning applications? You could have 6 planning applications year on year, but you need to submit your comments on each application for future reference.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of come back on the comments by Councillor Stevens, because that was a concern for me as well, because yes, we are Grantham and could think Grantham, but also we're part of Lincolnshire and Lincoln, especially for me, the comments from Lincoln City actually were of import. But I read the Stantec report, the detailed report, and they basically said at the end of the day, I think the impact was about 5%, 6%. It was around those figures and less. Well, it did depend, because, and the point was made, it was a judgment call. But what they said was actually ultimate decision is ours. It's and because perhaps we know our areas the best, so ultimately that decision was down to us.
Thank you, Councillor Forward.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, I fully support the scheme. I think the overwhelming evidence is to follow the recommendations and support it. I know there has been some concerns about the impact on Grantham, and Councillor Morgan just mentioned that. But am I right in my assumption that Stantec, we've employed Stantec as a totally independent consultant to give us their opinion, and I read on page 6 of the additional information, they actually, well, you've said, the planning officer said there would be no significant adverse impact on the affected centre. So presumably we've had independent consultants in, and their assessment of it is that there's no significant impact. Is that correct?
That's correct. They've been retained as retail advisors to the council throughout the assessment of this application, and their advice to us is that there isn't significant adverse impact on any of the affected centres.
Therefore, I see no reason why we shouldn't support it. Thank you.
Thank you. We've had, I think everybody's done with their chatting, discussion. We've had a proposer, we've had a seconder, so let's go to the vote. All those in favour? And that is unanimous, so that's been passed. Thank you very much. And thank you all for attending today. We will now go to item 4 on the agenda. And Adam will be presenting. Thank you, Adam, when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and good afternoon, members. Yes, this is application S210420, and it is a full detailed plan application for the partial demolition of the social club, proposed 2-storey extension and roof extension, and then change of use from a drinking establishment and assembly hall to residential use to create 15 residential units at 95A Westgate, and the application has been referred to committee due to being a major development. Now, members may recall that this application has previously been presented to committee in July last year and again in October last year. At the most recent committee meeting, members resolved that it was minded to approve the application subject to conditions and subject to a Section 106 agreement to secure the affordable housing requirements as a commuted sum. Now, since that time, a draft legal agreement has been produced on behalf of the local authority and has been circulated to the applicant. But that document remains unsigned, and we've now reached a point where there's an impasse in terms of the affordable housing provision. So it's been decided to bring the application back to committee for an updated resolution. As I say, so seeing as the application has been to committee before, I won't dwell too much in terms of location and the actual proposals themselves. As I say, the site's located between Westgate and Greyfriars in the centre of Grantham. And just there, just an overview for you. It's bound to the north by the Conduit Lane car park, to the west by single-storey industrial units, to the south by further industrial units, and to the east by 3-storey Grade 2 listed properties which front onto Westgate. The site is located immediately adjacent to the Grantham Conservation Area and is located within the town centre boundary. And as I say, the site at present comprises of the 1.5-storey hall along the western side, a 3-storey brick building within the centre of the site, a 1-storey addition along the eastern side of the site, and then a 1-storey gable-ended addition at the rear southern part of the site. And it's appreciated that the site is displaying significant evidence of fire damage and vandalism. In terms of the actual application proposals themselves, they remain the same as previously presented to the committee in October 2021, with the exception of that revision in terms of the affordable housing situation now. In terms of the actual built form and what's to change as part of the scheme, the 1.5-storey hall along the western side of the site has sufficient space for 2 floors of accommodation, and the proposal is to raise the roof height of that to provide an additional level of accommodation. 3-storey brick building in the middle is capable of conversion in its current form. The 1-storey toilet block along the eastern side would be removed and would be replaced with a courtyard amenity area. And the 1-storey gable-ended building at the rear of the site would be retained and extended by a further 2 stories, with the gable end incorporated within that part of the development. And that scheme would create up to 15 units, which would be a mix of 1-bed and 2-bed apartments. Now, as I say, in terms of the position where we are with the application at present, draft Section 106 agreement has been produced and has been sent to the applicant back in October of last year, and that document remains unsigned. Now, the applicant has indicated that they haven't entered into the agreement because of issues with viability in terms of paying the commuted sum. Now, local plan policy H2 does allow discussions to take place in terms of viability and the provision of affordable housing. But in that case, applicants are required to submit evidence in terms of viability assessment to substantiate any argument that they are making. And despite repeated requests from officers over the course of the last 6 months, no information has been submitted by the applicant. We have sought to agree extensions of time with them to allow that information to come forward, but unfortunately, still, we have not had any information. So in the absence of having a signed 106 to secure the affordable housing or any sort of viability assessment to justify a change to the affordable housing, the application is contrary to policy H2. And in light of the conflict now with policy H2, that has to be taken into account in terms of the overall planning balance for the scheme. Whilst the scheme is accepted, it's a relative sort of eyesore within the town centre at the moment and would be supported as a matter of principle for development on that site. And there's also benefits in terms of delivering smaller housing units within the town centre. As I say, there is that conflict with policy H2 now because the affordable housing would not come forward. And members will also recall that there was previously an element of conflict identified in terms of policy SP6 and GR4 of the local plan, which relate to seeking to retain community facilities and also about the appropriateness of residential accommodation at the ground floor within the town centre. So in terms of an updated assessment of the scheme, the view is now that the application is contrary to the development plan taken as a whole, and the material considerations in this case are not sufficient to outweigh that conflict. So the updated recommendation to members today is to authorise the Assistant Director of Planning to refuse planning permission for the reasons set out within the report. And I'll hand back to you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you very much, Adam, for that presentation. Do I have any, as we do not have any public speakers, do I have any questions for the officer? Councillor Dilks.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation. Could you just tell us when was the last time the applicant responded, and is the applicant aware that the application is coming before us today?
So I believe the last communication that we had with them was towards the end of January, sort of middle of February. Communication that we had with them at that point was that they had previously look to appoint a viability consultant, but they then explained that the consultant that they had appointed had then gone out of business. We then sought to agree a further extension with them until the end of February for them to provide further information in terms of who it was that they had appointed and evidence of that, and details of who they would look to appoint as an alternative consultant. No information was provided in response to that. And we had, at the point where we had requested that information, they were notified at that stage that if that information wasn't forthcoming, that unfortunately we would be left in very little position but to bring the application back to committee.
Thank you for that, Madam Chairman. I mean, in that case, and thank you for that, I'm in danger of agreeing with the officers again, Chairman. It's not my practice, as you know, and I'm joking. But I'd be happy to propose now that we accept the officer's recommendation, and I propose that we refuse the application. Thank you.
Councillor Penny Robbins.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I've listened to you and agree with Councillor Dilks. They've had an extension. The application the applicant failed to provide detailed documentation evidence, failed to agree to a planning obligation to secure affordable housing. They've had no contact. I think they've had ample time to sort everything out, and it is a shame because it is an eyesore at the moment. So it would benefit from it being carried out. So I'd like to second Councillor Dill.
Thank you very much. Councillor David Bellamy, you wanted?
Yeah, what did the applicant intend to do? Did he intend to rent them out from his own point of view, or was he going to sell them?
So I think their intention was to rent them out themselves.
Thank you, Councillor Paulwood.
Yeah, I agree with what's been said, Madam Chairman. It seems quite clear to me we've done all we can. But we've given them 12 weeks and extended it and spoke to them. They've not come back to us, so it's fairly clear to me we should refuse it. I support the recommendation to refuse it.
I quite agree with you. If there's nobody else wishing to speak in the debate, can we go for, if we've got a proposer and a seconder, all those in favour? That is unanimous again. Thank you very much, Adam, for your presentation. Next we go to item 5 on the agenda, and that will be Ellie. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll just have a 10-minute comfort break back at 3. Thank you. Thank you, members. Back at 3 o'clock. Fantastic. Ellie, start when you're ready, please, my lovely.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good afternoon, councillors. This last application is reference S220285, and it's the demolition of an existing industrial unit and the erection of 2 industrial buildings with ancillary offices, new accesses, associated parking, servicing, landscape and retaining walls. The address is Tolmarsh Road South in Grantham, and my name's Ellie Siller. The key issues with this one are the principle of development, impact on the character of the area, impact on residential amenity, impact on highways and drainage. So this is an aerial image of the site. You can see outlined in red. It's within already an industrial area, and it's pretty much central to it. This shows it in more detail. You can see the access roads to the south and to the east of the site. They're existing. And the surrounding commercial uses. These are some site photos. That building in both of those photos is the one to be demolished. And that shows a bit of the surrounding area as well. This is the proposed site plan. So it's two new buildings. The one further south in the site, that's a larger building for storage. And then the one to the north is slightly smaller, and that would be for a joinery workshop. You can see that the surrounding land would be used for the car parking areas, and then there would be landscaping to the edges. These are the elevations for the larger building, and the second one for the smaller building. See, fairly typical commercial appearance. So the evaluation and the principle is acceptable. The site is already identified as a locally important employment site. Policy E4 supports proposals for redevelopment of this type on these sites. The design's in keeping with the surrounding area. As I said, it's typical commercial appearance. There's no residential buildings nearby, so no harm to residential amenity. Parking and access are acceptable. No objections have been raised at all, but none from LCC Highway specifically. And then the drainage scheme is required by condition because of the comments that have come in from Anglian Water. But just to make a point, LCC Highways have no problem with the drainage, as at the moment there's unrestricted flow, and that would be reduced from this scheme. So the proposals in accordance with the relevant policies in the adopted local plan and the MPPF, and the recommendation is to approve the application subject to the conditions that are in the committee report. Thank you. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Ellie, for that presentation. Do I have any questions for the officer? No? Well, I'm quite happy, if we've got no questions, to propose this. It's already a site for industrial. We're going to have to. Awesome. Lovely, thank you. So proposer and seconder, all those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. Thank you very much, Ellie. Thank you. We'll go to item 6 next, and that's Adam again. Aren't you lucky? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, this final item is S220447, and it is a full planning application for alterations and extension to a property, including erection of a workroom in the rear courtyard and reconfiguration of the roof structure at 7A Abbey Road, Bourne. And the application has been referred to committee due to the applicant being related to a district councillor. The site is a 2-storey mid-terrace commercial building located on the northeast side of Abbey Road within the centre of Bourne. So just a wider context plan there, just showing it aerially, and then zoomed in a little bit further, you can just see the building here. Properties on either side of the site comprise of ground floor commercial uses with first floor residential accommodation. And then to the rear of the site are residential uses. So you've got a apartment block to the rear of the site here. The application site falls within the secondary shopping frontage of Bourne Town Centre and is also located within the conservation area. The building itself is currently vacant, with the most recent use being a ground floor shoe shop with upper floor residential accommodation. As I say, the application in this case involves internal and external alterations to the main unit, which is 7A Abbey Road, to create a ground floor retail unit with separate self-contained flat at the first floor level. So you've just got some images here showing the existing ground floor, proposed ground floor plan, existing first floor plan, and then proposed first floor plan. Changes are probably easier to demonstrate in terms of the elevation. So that's just an image there showing the existing elevations. So you've got the southern elevation, which is the front of the property, and the north elevation, which is the rear of the property. The pitched roof of the rear extension is to be removed and replaced with a flat roof. The existing roof of the property is to be replaced with clay pantiles, and the windows of the property are to be replaced with a mixture of sash windows and casement windows. And the chimney block on the rear elevation is to be lowered. At the back of the site, there's an existing lean-to structure along this boundary here, which is to be demolished and replaced with a new single-storey workroom building, which would measure 4.9 metres wide, 8.1 metres long, and 3.4 metres high, and would be constructed of timber boarding and would have 3 roof lights in the roofscape. The intended occupier of the site is the craft centre, who are to be relocated from 17 West Street. And this proposed workshop building is intended to be used for storing excess stock and for hosting some crafting classes on an intermittent basis. In terms of the key issues in this case, planning permission has been granted under delegated powers in February 2020 for the works to take place to the main building. That is an extant planning permission and provides a relevant fallback position in terms of the overall proposal. So in that sense, it's only the proposed workroom facility that effectively falls to be considered as part of the current scheme in front of members. The overall principle of development is considered to be acceptable. In terms of the impact on the overall character of the area, as I say, the site's located within the conservation area. Council's conservation officer has raised no objections subject to conditions which have been included. And the design, scale and materials of the outbuilding are considered to be appropriate in terms of the host building and its surrounding context. In terms of residential amenity, given the single-storey nature of the outbuilding and the relationship that it would have with the adjacent uses, the overall officer's opinion is that the workroom wouldn't give rise to any unacceptable impacts on neighbouring amenities. So again, the recommendation to members is that the application accords with the development plan as a whole. No material considerations to indicate permission should not be granted. So it's recommended that the Assistant Director is authorised to grant planning permissions subject to conditions in the main report. I'll hand back to you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Adam, for that presentation again. Do I have any questions for Adam? Do I have anybody wishing to speak in debate? Do I have any proposers? Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Do I have a seconder? Oh, Penny. Councillor Robbins, you want to second? Lovely. And we've had a proposed seconder. All those in favour? That's lovely. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Just one thing to bear in mind, that next time we have an agenda, we will have quite a few minutes to read through. I do apologise for that, but there was an issue with the system. So look forward to seeing you next month. And thank you very much for your attendance today. And I close the meeting at 3:10. Thank you. And thank you, officers, for all your presentations and hard work as normal. Thank you.